Hi, so this is an instrument cluster from a 2001 Mercury Sable. The problem I've had is everything has functioned perfectly except the illumination of the gauges. It started as an intermittent problem, and then a couple of years ago it just quit entirely, and so I've just driven kind of blind in that aspect for all that time, and finally started searching online and seeing that this is a fairly common problem. And there is a site, I think it's a Taurus club forum, and they had some blogs, and I did some reading on there, and it seems that the problem is just a poor connection between the contacts here on the back side with the plugs themselves. And I never could find great detail of what those guys did to fix it, but I know part of the problem could be corrosion on the plug itself, which in my case I didn't see any corrosion, and so I think some of them would actually bend these plugs out a little bit, the tabs, to make a better contact. But because I didn't want to risk breaking those, and they're not quite as easy to get to, being that they are connected in the dash, I decided to cut some paper stock, and it's about the thickness of a playing card or a matchbook, and I made just a little hook. This is actually just a wire tie. You could do the same thing with a straightened out paper clip and put a little hook at the end of it, but I just pulled this guy all the way out, which I'm not going to do it now because I've already done it, and I'm fearful that doing it repeatedly might damage the little board itself. But so I just cut a piece of paper the same width and depth as these contacts here, pulled this guy back, laid that piece of paper in there, did that on each side, and then when I plugged it back in, voila, I had all my illumination. So that's what I did to fix that. Again, this is a 2001 Sable, but through reading and researching on the blogs, it seems like this is a fairly common problem with other years as well. There also seems to be some apprehension from different guys about tearing into this. I decided to make this video after the fact, so I'm going to go ahead and video as I put everything back together. And so if you do have this problem, you'll just obviously have to do it in the reverse order of what my video is. But it's not that bad. So the first thing I'm going to do is, after I plug this back in to the plugs, there are 4 bolts in the dash itself, and it's probably kind of hard to see here, but there's just 4 bolts that hold that in place. So that's going to be the first thing that I'll do, is plug it back in and then bolt those 4 bolts back in place, and then I'll pick it up from there. So before I reassemble everything, I wanted to point out, I decided to heed the advice of some of the blogs that I read, and while you've got this thing out, you might as well change at least the illumination lamps in them. There's 5 of them, and to remove them, you just simply just give them a little counterclockwise turn. They pull right out, and then the lamps actually pull right out of that little holder. I went with the Sylvania Long Lifes, part number 194. I'm in California. These were $5 a package here, but I did quickly scan the barcode, and you can get them at Amazon for $2.99 instead of $4.99 like I paid. So if you're planning this out a little bit in advance, you save yourself a few bucks if you buy them online. They had some blue and some amber bulbs. I really really thought about the blue ones, but they only had 2 packages, so that wouldn't have worked. But at this point, it'll be nice to just have some lights, so I'll be happy with that. So I have the cluster mounted back in. Certainly before I put all the screws back in, I plugged everything in, plugged the switch back in, and gave it a test to make sure before I mounted it permanently that everything was working, and it is in fact working. One other thing I would point out that I read on one of the blogs is, you know, the car will run without the cluster installed, but your alternator will not charge. And so I read of one guy made a couple trips to pick up a couple things, and it killed his battery. And so he ended up tearing everything back apart, thinking that he had goofed something up within, you know, under the cluster, that he had pulled something loose. And said he was just about to the point to pull his starter and have it tested when he decided to check the voltage on his battery, and seen in fact that it was below 12 volts. So he was able to charge it and solve the problem. So the next thing to go back in is this trim piece. There's a little lip here that you got to kind of finagle underneath the lip of the dash itself. Most of this snaps in place. There is one screw down here on this bottom portion. One of the tricky parts of getting this out is you have to, before you can get it out from, you know, completely out of your way and obstruction, and before you can get it past the steering wheel and everything, you've got to remove this air diffuser, which just pops. It's got snaps that snap in, with the exception of one screw. And I got a little bit impatient and was trying to get that loose, and I broke that ear off. So when you're removing yours, just be cautious. You can, you know, before you get it out, you can get back in there behind it with a screwdriver, pull that screw out, and like I said, the rest of it just snaps into place. And then once you remove that, then you can physically get this whole trim piece up and out of your way. So I'm going to go ahead and reinstall that and then pick it back up from there. So I have the upper trim piece back in place, and then also mounted the switch back in. This housing just pops into that trim piece. There's no screws that hold it. If you get a little prying tool, I think some guys use maybe a dull butter knife, and kind of get in behind that on each side of the cover. There are clips on each side, and it will just pop out. This whole upper trim piece just snaps into place, with the exception of the one screw down there. And so you do have to land that screw first, and then now the next thing is to put the bottom trim back in place. And there are, I forget right offhand, I think there's 5 screws in the stereo climate control area that mount this in place, and then I believe there's one kind of down underneath the steering column. So I'm going to go ahead and mount that back now. So I was incorrect about there being another bolt on this bottom portion of that lower trim. So the next piece that goes back is the knee guard, and it pops on this model. There's 2 snaps on the top, and then 2 bolts down on the bottom section. Those are, I believe those are 8mm, and I believe all the remainders are all 7mm. So I'm going to go ahead and put that back in, and then the only thing left is the radio and climate control. Okay, so the only thing left to do is put the radio and climate control console back in place. This probably could have been accomplished without removing all the plugs and totally removing the radio, but I just thought it would be easier and give myself a little bit more room. These all come off fairly easily. Every plug is different, so there's no problem with, you know, mixing something back up when you reinstall it. They all have little tabs that you have to depress and then pull out. Certainly take caution doing that, as those are easily breakable. And then one of the other things I read on a lot of the blogs is people debating and worrying about, you know, obtaining the special U-shaped tool from Ford, and there's a part number for it, and I don't know what it is, but I've had this thing in and out numerous times, and I always just use 16 penny nails. They fit perfectly in the hole, and all you're doing when you insert those is you're just depressing this little clip here. I don't know how well you can see it, but when you want to put them both in simultaneously, and if you just press fairly easily, and you don't have to bottom all the way out, but all it's doing is just depressing that clip. You're doing that at the same time on both sides, and that allows this whole unit to just slide straight out. So I think that's it for the video. Hopefully somebody else will find this helpful, and hopefully that will help them realize that it's not such a daunting task, and hopefully they won't drive around for 2+ years in the dark like I did. So good day, thank you. So I got all finished, and I had 2 of these 7mm screws left, and I had to think about where they go. I know a lot of people say that's a sign of a good mechanic that he has screws left, but actually I forgot they go up here in the top of that upper trim piece. So I'll put them back in and everything will be good to go. Thanks again. Bye-bye.